In 1977, a pair of high school students named James Spielman and Kevin Bow decided to start their own country. They lived in Portland, Oregon, which of course is part of the United States, but James and Kevin didn't let that stop them. They founded the Grand Republic of Vuldstein, which included James as the king and Kevin as prime minister. It had a flag, a national symbol, currency, and they even established holidays for the country. Now, what did they not have? Well, it didn't really have any property or its own military, and it wasn't recognized by any world government. And it didn't have its own legal jurisdiction. It existed under the laws of the United States. But amazingly, it still exists as of 2025, almost 50 years later. It has a new name, the Republic of Molossia, and it's now located in Nevada. Molossia is what is known as a micronation. Micronations are small groups of people who have decided to self-identify as political entities that exist outside of any currently existing countries or nations. They don't actually have any real power or national wealth, and they don't have the ability to actually make their own laws. And usually, they're done mostly as a joke, founded in people's backyards or on their personal property. Now, there's a long history of people declaring themselves kings or warlords of pieces of land everywhere across the world, but that was back when war was fought on horseback and maps ended at the edge of the world and had pictures of dragons on them. The modern micronation phenomenon really began in the 1960s. It was the era of civil disobedience from the government, from civil rights to women's rights to anti-war sentiments. People were finding all kinds of creative ways to protest so they could bring attention to social issues. The earliest documented cases of micronations grew from that protest movement, as individuals sought to express their freedom from what they saw as a tyrannical government. The reasons for micronations have expanded in number and variety over the years. Sometimes they're political statements, sometimes they're jokes, sometimes they're money-making schemes or scams, and sometimes people want to create a utopia. But they all have one thing in common. They're basically illegal. There is no country in the world that allows its citizens to declare themselves sovereign rulers of some piece of that country. However, most countries don't spend a lot of time seeking out and eliminating micronations when they're not a genuine threat to anyone's safety or freedom. If it's all done in good fun, the government tends to let people have their fun. In 1964, Lester Hemingway formed the micronation of New Atlantis. Lester Hemingway was the brother of famed author and outdoor adventurer Ernest Hemingway, and they shared a love of nature. Lester was passionate about sea life, and he was worried about the future of conservation efforts, so he decided to bring it some attention by creating a new nation. He built a 250 square foot raft that he towed by boat 6 miles out off the coast of Jamaica and anchored it in place using the engine block of a Ford car. He dubbed it New Atlantis, claiming half of it for the US and the other half for himself as his own discovery. He made himself president of the micronation, and his wife and children were its first citizens. He planned to use the raft as a floating oceanography research station to bring attention and discovery to the public. He also started an attempt to expand New Atlantis by dropping rocks in the water in the hopes of creating an artificial island that would double the size of his micronation. He also tried to bring attention to his nation by selling stamps and attempting to get the endorsement of then-President Lyndon B. Johnson, who played along with it by calling Hemingway the, quote, acting president. But it was all doomed to failure when an Atlantic storm destroyed the raft. Hemingway evacuated for his safety, and the nation came to an end. But the attempt inspired others to try the same. Another group attempted to start a micronation by attempting seasteading, which is the act of building a floating residence in international waters. They built a planned seasteading vessel called Atlantis II, which they sailed through the Hudson River on its way down to the Bahamas. And just like its inspiration, Atlantis and New Atlantis, it was also destroyed in an Atlantic hurricane. It's probably a bad idea to name a floating micronation after a mythical city that is mostly known for sinking into the sea. At that point, you're kind of asking for it. Now, because of the many efforts throughout the 1970s and 1980s to create micronations, an independent research group was created to study the micronations themselves. It was called the International Micropatriological Society. By 1976, the IMS had information on at least 128 different micronations. The creation of micronations began as an American trend, but it expanded across the world to other places where total independence was appealing. One of those places was Australia. Many Australians highly value their freedom and independence, and they loved the idea of simply declaring otherwise uninhabited stretches of outback wilderness as their own sovereign nations. But in the case of some Australian micronations, it wasn't just about freedom. Some of these new places tried to use their status as a, quote, country as an excuse to not pay taxes. While the other countries mostly laughed off their citizens' micronations, Australia wasn't having it. One micronation, the Principality of Hutt River, ran up a tab of almost $3 million in back taxes in the years between the early 1970s and 2017, and Australia wanted its money. There have been long-lasting court battles about collecting that money. In Italy, a micronation by the name of the Republic of Rose Island tried to make a profit from their status as a country. It was a platform in the Adriatic Sea formed by an architect named Giorgio Rosa. He tried to turn it into a tourist attraction, but he claimed that because it was its own sovereign nation, it exempted him from paying taxes. Well, that was a bad idea, because it got the Italian government angry. Rather than arguing with Rose in the courts, the Italian government simply raided the Republic of Rose Island. They arrested Rosa, and then the Navy blew it up. So in case you were wondering what happens to a micronation that tries to get out of paying its taxes, there's your answer. It gets sunk to the bottom of the Adriatic Sea by the Italian Navy. Just like any other cool trend, micronations were co-opted by rich weirdos who wanted to use their wealth and influence to form their own nations. In the early 2000s, particularly tech CEOs weren't satisfied simply ruling the virtual world. They needed to grab a chunk of the real world too. One of the primary tech folks who wanted to be a micronation pioneer was Peter Thiel, the CEO of PayPal. In 2009, he wrote an essay where he praised the idea of micronations as havens for rich people. He referred to micronations as, quote, an escape from politics in all its forms. In his case, as with many more wealthy adoptees of the micronation trend, he wasn't interested in making a political statement or having fun. He genuinely wanted to have unfettered freedom to do anything he wanted in a real-world playground for the ultra-wealthy. The good news for the rest of us is that Peter Thiel eventually realized that micronations simply weren't a feasible alternative, even for uber-rich people like himself. In 2014, he gave up his dream of starting a functional micronation because he said, according to his calculations, the most modest of micronations would need an annual budget of about $50 billion to even have a chance to really thrive. Sometimes even rich people can't just do whatever they want, and that was proven when Las Vegas real estate mogul Michael Oliver decided to form a micronation in the middle of the South Pacific. He built a platform onto a stretch of exposed reef and declared it the libertarian Republic of Minerva. But there's one thing he forgot, as rich people often do. He didn't bother to check if it actually belonged to someone else first. Because it turns out that that piece of reef belonged to the Polynesian kingdom of Tonga, and they were not too happy about an American millionaire trying to invade their domain. So Tonga invaded the Republic of Minerva, and it did not go well for Oliver. He and his libertarian Minervan population were forced off the reef. Now, of course, being a rich and entitled guy, Oliver wasn't ready to give up just yet. He waited about a decade, and then he went back in 1982 and tried to declare sovereignty over the reef again. And that's when the Kingdom of Tonga sent Oliver and the Minervans packing for the second and final time. They proved that just because you have money, it doesn't mean you get to take what you want and turn it into your own personal country. So the next time you're feeling frustrated about all the rules and taxes you have to pay in your country, remember that going out into the middle of the ocean to start your own micronation sounds cool, but it will end up costing you a lot more than the taxes that you're paying. And you might get invaded by Tonga, blown up by the Italian Navy, or sunken by an Atlantic hurricane. That's it for this episode of No Way That's Legal. If you want more wild but true stories of the legal world, be sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.